Hi, welcome to the Healthy Little Moments podcast. My name is Dorota. I'm the host of the podcast, and I'm so excited to introduce you to our very special guest. We have Ken Kaplan, and Ken is actually the owner of a holistic wellness center in New Jersey called Quantum Wellness. And I'm so excited to be able to speak with him today and really pick his brain about his journey into wellness. And Ken has a fascinating story. We spoke a few weeks ago, and he is actually a very successful lawyer on the East Coast, turned wellness center owner. And I just want to hear more about this journey and about all the offerings that your wellness center offers, and to better understand all those different healing modalities, some that we might have heard of, some maybe not. For example, floating. So I was introduced to floating probably 10 years ago, and it completely blew my mind. I thought at first it was just like another add-on at a spa. And after one or two sessions, I felt completely different in my mind relaxed, and in my body. And I found it completely transformative. And so we're going to kick off into what that is, the science behind floating, infrared therapy, and all the other healing modalities. But most importantly, we're going to jump into Ken's story. So I just wanted maybe I could turn it over to you so you could just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about you and why a holistic wellness center was your calling and how this all started. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me here. I appreciate it very much. Just a point of clarification, because you said turned to wellness center owner, which is true, but I'm still I say nearly full-time practicing attorney, because I've been a lawyer for 35 years, what they call a corporate lawyer. When some people learn that I've owned the wellness center for only 10 years, they immediately say, is that your side gig? Which kind of I laugh at, because if you're an owner of a business, it's like, well, it's like if you had twins. The first one out, is the second one your side gig?
Good comparison.
Yeah, they're both full-time dedication efforts. So as I said, I've gotten to this wild wellness business that I'm in. I got involved maybe 15 years ago when I tried float therapy. I didn't know anything about it. I was at a networking event. Somebody mentioned it. Back then, there weren't places to float. I had to find a place. I found a woman who had a float tank in her basement. And I used to go once a week from my law firm in Morristown, New Jersey. That's kind of central Jersey, East Coast, to the float center, and then back home once a week. It wasn't long after that before I very firmly got an idea that there needs to be this in a bigger presence in New Jersey around where I live. And it took a while. I ended up building a 7,000 square foot wellness center, opening it up in 2021. Between 2015, I should say, and 2021, I had I'll call it a little feeder spot that became kind of the precursor to the big center that we have now.
And let me ask you, what inspired you to try it? Hearing floating at a networking event shared with you, that was a light bulb moment. You're like, maybe this is something you need to try.
I think for me, and I suspect this is true for a lot of people, at least I'm going to say it in a kind of a way that sounds rational, and then I'll say it differently, and I'll tell you why I'm saying it twice. For people that are looking for, let's just say, maybe inner relief, there's a lot of things out there. Floating is one, but there's a lot of people that are looking, you could say crack the code, or you could say they're looking for relief from their own self-torment. That sounds kind of dramatic, but it's not. For the most part, the issues that people most want to solve are of their own making. And that was true for me. I've always been kind of an inner explorer like that. And there's a lot of people out there. There's no demographic I found out for this business. They come from, they're students and moms and dads and CEOs and blue collar and white collar workers. I don't think there's any demographic of kind of what I'll call inner explorer, but it is kind of the inner explorer. That's kind of one way that I think about it. The other way that I think about it, and I think you have to kind of pay attention to this aspect of it, especially when you're in this business, and that is we're not always aware of what we do. We think we are, and we think we're like in the captain's driver's seat of like where we're going, and I'm doing this, and look, my life, I planned out A, B, and C, and I'm such a great planner. And you could be a great planner, but for the most part, things that happen, maybe you could say for the greater part, or even entirely, if you want, is driven by thoughts that you're not aware of. You could say below the level of conscious awareness. And that's certainly true for me. And I always wonder sometimes when people come into a wellness center or want to float, including myself, what was really driving them, right? If you ask them, hey, how come you're here? Everybody, kind of says, well, I heard from so-and-so, but there's always more to it. I think as everybody knows, there's kind of this drive that some people have that they're not even aware of to solve for something, whatever that is.
I feel that in my core. And I think a lot of people can relate to that especially when they look back in their life or actions they've taken or things that have happened. So that's interesting. So I just want to pause real quick and talk about floating, just the science behind it, what it is and what it does for the mind and body, because we've talked about it a little bit. The audience might not know what exactly we're talking about. So if you could just jump into that.
Sure. Let me create a picture first, and then I can kind of add detail. Imagine going into a spa or a spa-like environment and having a private room. And in the private room, there is a cabin or a tank, or they come in all shapes and sizes. So it's hard to describe it with a particular configuration. Inside this room, inside a room, is like a pool of water. Not that large. Maybe it's 8 feet long, the pool, by 4.5 feet wide. So plenty of room for people of all sizes. Water filled with only about 10 inches of water, heated to about 94 degrees, although we keep our temperatures closer to 95. Not that, that's because people complain when it's too chilly. But there's 1,000 pounds of Epsom salt dissolved in that water, and that makes the water more buoyant than most people have ever been in. You're almost freakishly buoyant. You float like a cork. Even people like me that I'll sink in any other body of water, right to the bottom. I thought it was some deformity I had when I used to go to the pool and watch people float. I just sank to the bottom. But in a float tank, everybody floats. And another attribute of a float tank is that the experience is one to remove the outside world. And by the outside world, you could say external stimulations. And by external stimulations, these are the things that our nervous system always has to process when we're awake in the outside world. That could be light, even in our bed at night. There's some ambient lights. Sound, for sure, we're always kind of processing the outside world and giving meaning to sounds. A temperature, our body has to maintain its core. So no matter where we are, the body needs to maintain its core temperature. And more than those things, gravity, navigating the effects of gravity. Now, it all sounds kind of silly because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today's going to be the best navigation of gravity day I ever had. But if you think about it, those external stimulations consume an enormous amount of, what should we say? Let's call it circuitry, okay? Let's call it the energy that we normally have to dedicate. In a float tank, not there. So you have all this extra horsepower to turn inward and to profoundly relax. And it's more than relaxing. I could say relax. I can say it in a lot of different ways, but that's what it is. It's maybe you could say rebalancing your central nervous system, relaxing. Some people might say rewiring, but there's a lot of benefits at levels even deeper than that I'd be happy to get into that probably go more towards what's really bringing people here.
And I really want to get into that as well. But before we do, what are some physical success stories that you have seen and mental with your clients in the experiences that they have had, removing all that noise that we have, which we have more than I think ever before with devices and just the speed of society right now?
Well, let's keep in mind that the physical and the mental are one and the same, or maybe two sides of the same coin. The central nervous system extends to the tips of our fingers and the tips of our toes. That's probably all we need to know to kind of understand that what shows up physically really has a relationship to, I could say how we feel, but maybe it's even better said how we think. That would be more kind of accurate. So people come in and they present, with all sorts of, things, sometimes it's, just I'm generally stressed. Other times it's, my neck is stiff, my back. But, the real question always is what's really going on.
It's like that book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Body keeps the score, right? It keeps the score. Sometimes you're like, down by like 80 runs, body's keeping score, or you're in a real slump. And it seems that the external world is causing the slump. But I found in this business for nearly 15 years, the best place to look, I'd go so far as to say the only real place worth looking is inside. How are you processing the external world? So we want to get people to process it a little better. And you could say maybe another way of saying that is think about things a little bit differently to change the way their body is reacting to their thoughts or the way they're processing the external world. So there's less pains in their neck and back. And yeah, they float and they're like, wow, I'm never felt so free. And I can't believe my back or my neck doesn't hurt anymore. But that's just part of it.
And so you said something interesting. And if an audience is listening to you right now and says, that's me, how do I dive deeper in that? Or how would I start on that journey?
Well, let me just put it back at you just so we can frame the question instead of just saying that journey. Let's just say, what journey do you?
The journey of self-reflection and healing, the inner journey. Let's leave it there.
Okay.
Inner exploration. I'll use your words from the intro. Yeah. Inner relief. How about that?
Yeah. I have learned or come up with a kind of a way to think about thought. It's not the only, it's just a way. So just, everybody take it with a grain of salt. It's, there's probably lots of different ways. It kind of is one of those things that language is useful at best to kind of point at what something is. It's never precise, but this is a pretty good thing that I think will help with the inner journey. Consider that the mind is, this thing we call a head or a skull is just dark inside, people, and these things here that I'm looking at with eyes, while we think they perceive what's actually going on in the external world or can see it, they can't. They don't. It's just, check the neuroscience. It's not the way it works. The best we can ever do is perceive. That's all we can do. We give meaning, which is an interesting thing to start with, because if that's true, which I will suggest it is, then all we're doing is just filtering what we hear and what we see and even what we feel through our thinking machinery, our thoughts, and assigning meaning. So the question is, well, what are you assigning meaning to? And in this kind of inner exploration, one of the things I think that's important to keep in mind is, what do you believe? People say, what do you mean, what I believe? I don't believe. How can you ask me such a question? And you could see the emotion maybe and the feelings coming from that, but it's like, whoa, wait a second. What's the belief behind that? Because it's always at that. You can think of that almost as at your operating system level, that the real healing or self journey really has to get at. It really does. In lots of ways, making an analogy between my silicone-based computer here, or the one I'm talking to you, and this, what I'll call biocomputer, really good, useful, because this has an operating system. You don't see it every day. It's not, like, ooh, cool, I'm going to play with my operating system today. But it's running the show. We do too. And this inner exploration and journey really is, I think, most fruitful with an examination of what you believe to be real in the world. What are the things, let me give an example of that so I can put some kind of color on it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the hardest thing to get people to see is that they're already okay. It's the hardest thing. It seemed like if you would have told me this before I started this business, I'd be like, you're crazy, but it's true. So, some people just don't believe that they're already okay. What do you want to say? Good enough. Well, that's not at the level of their kind of logical mind. It's not at their feeling mind. It's not even at the emotional part. It's actually something they decided to be real based on experiences that they had most likely before the age of 4.
Yeah.
Floating is great to kind of start to open that up and start to explore that. Now, I know there's going to be some people listening to this already that say, thanks, but no, thanks, not going there. No, it's true. We have that, and that's fine. But consider that those thoughts they don't go away. They're still working you. And I'm kind of agnostic to what people think about. I mean, I really am. But if you tell me where you're going or where you want to go, I'm pretty helpful at telling people helping them see whether the thoughts they currently use to perceive the world are standing in their way of what they just told me they want to get to.
That's really powerful and scary, probably, for many people who are listening to this and maybe hearing this for the first time.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah.
And so I think there's an interest for many people for that inner exploration and they hear all these things. And I say these things, maybe it's to try floating, maybe it's an infrared sauna, which I want to touch on as well. I know that's been very popular the past decade, probably. There's new one block away from my house, which I can't wait to try. So how do you get past then the hurdle of the computer, our brain, telling us then and putting up those walls? How do you break through that programming in our computer that tells us we're not okay? And many times I agree with you. I've read a lot about this. A lot of that happens before the age of 4 and memories that we probably don't remember consciously. So how have you helped your clients break through that?
Well, slowing down is an important step. Slowing down your biocomputer. Let me see if I can give an example. A lot of people will walk into the float center and, hey, how you doing? Yes, I'm really okay. Oh my God, I got to do this today. I was at this place, was at the place. And do you believe what she said? And she said this and that. And my Uncle Charlie was here and stuff. And I'm so glad I'm here today. Oh my God, I can't wait to float. Stuff like that. Okay, that is that's a cadence. That's a pace. It's very common, especially common on the East Coast. I think here people race. I don't know what to say about that, but when I go other places, it doesn't seem quite as fast generally as it is here. And maybe that's what people mean by being on the rat race or something like that. But people, when you're wound up, your thoughts are really fast. You can't really think about anything. There's no way to, everything seems like survival mode or automated mode. But when you start to slow down, by definition, you have to give up that frenzy. So the process sometimes of giving up the frenzy is just going in a float tank or meditating and learning how to slow down. You're almost reverse hacking that fast-paced speed. And then everything is like, I feel better now. It's like you can start to even ask, why do I do that? And that's, in some sense, the maybe wholly unsatisfying answer, but true of this thing that you asked is if you're going to make a change to your biocomputer, 2 things are needed. One's not enough. You need to have them both. Thing one is you have to recognize how you look at the world. I can say that you have to recognize what you believe to be real. Those would be the same things. Maybe you could also say you have to uncover the memory, because I think of memory a lot differently, I think, than people use it in ordinary parlance. You have to uncover the memory that kind of kick-started that was the launch point of that. That's the first part. You got to kind of recognize it. But the second part is change. Like, change? You're not telling me anything. How am I going to change? I've been trying to change my whole life. Well, probably not. How dare you say probably not? You don't know my journey. I've been through this and that and that and the other, and it's still haunting me. Well, I can say it tongue in cheek. It's not going to be very satisfying. If you wanted to change, you would. So what I'm suggesting to you, Mr. and Mrs. Client that's complaining about this, is that you really don't want to change. How come? How come? What's the benefit that you get out of that? I don't get a benefit out of that. What is this? Well, you probably do. It's it's probably do. We had a client come in that was complaining, and she has right to complain about how she's treated by her significant other. And it's not good. This is, he does not treat her well. What she described in terms of the lack of respect is unbelievable. But the more interesting question is, what does she get out of that? Again, this is often met by, how dare you say that to me? How dare you? I just told you everything about him, and you're now telling me some. 2 things can be true at the same time. He could be a royal asshole. Sorry for the French. But, you have to look, as we said in the beginning, what's going on? What do you get out of that? Or why do you insist on being treated as a doormat? Because that's the only place really to turn. Otherwise, you wouldn't allow someone to treat you like that. And I'm sorry to say, you'd kick his ass from here to high end, to get out of here. Nobody's going to talk to me like that. And that's really, we want to get people to be able to see that so they can take their lives in their own hand.
I love that. One of my favorite sayings is, what we allow continues, right? And empowering somebody to take their power back.
It sounds somewhat offensive, but it's true, and might as well say it in the most affirmative way. It's true allow, but how about insist on? How can you say I insist on being treated like that? But I like to make the point because I think it makes people, it kind of intensifies it, where they're either gonna, kind of see it and want to see it and come clean and say, right, I've been doing this, and that's great. Who cares? That's part of it too. We have up so many defenses and don't want people to see who we are. They see, they know, you're not hiding anything. Oh, yes, you're not. But what if, people see me for who they are? Will they love me less? No, they'll probably love you more because that's an invitation for them to do the same. Now they see you holding cards behind your back, proverbially, everybody kind of does that. But when you kind of come clean and be vulnerable, you're giving people an invitation to do the same.
That is powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
So you've shared a lot, and I love all of this, and I thank you. I would love to hear some of your biggest influences that have helped you change to get to this place in your mindset and to learn all of this. So who have been some of your biggest influences in your wellness journey? And I say wellness mentally, physically, it's all interconnected, like you said.
Okay, I spent, well, I sometimes pass over this part really fast, but I've done a lot of training. I don't know how to call it because a lot of people do training. It's all kind of the same. People call it therapy, and mine was not in the form of therapy. It was more what maybe some people might call modern shamanic training, although I very hesitantly use the term shamanic because people conjures up images of me going down to South America and doing ayahuasca, and it really wasn't like that. It was that I happened to have a mentor that was very experienced on understanding and navigating human thought, and introducing to me ways of thinking about it. And even a language. You might say, well, big deal, language. But language is important. I was talking to my staff about this because if you don't have a language to think about or talk about something, you can't really understand it. So in some sense, I had one mentor that I spent about 12 years training with that taught me a language of thought, but very science-based, very much neuroscience mixed with physics, mixed with shamanism, those things. Again, I use that shamanism thing very hesitantly because if nothing else, I like to be really practical about things. Maybe it's the lawyer in me. But, I subscribe to a spiritual side of all of us. Something maybe you could say that is more than the body. And sometimes you say that and people are like, whatever, or somebody say, of course, because they believe in, various belief systems, some religious and some not, where that is a central component. But you could just as well call it whatever you want. For me, when I first formed the business, thinking of it in terms of the quantum world was easier for me because I have a science and a law background. It wasn't so easy to talk about things in the spiritual world because I just, it was hard for me to do that. But once I started to get into the quantum physics, which is very big influence on how I think about things, then it was like, yeah, we, kind of when we think about quantum physics, we have to subscribe to that there's more than we know in terms of what's going on outside of us. And maybe you could say in connectedness and energy and how we influence others and things. So that's a big, it's been a big part. So yeah, been lucky to have some good mentors, and especially those that insist on me knowing the difference between what I know versus what I believe versus what I think. Those are different things. They're important. I have things that I only think, but I don't know. But I'm usually pretty careful if someone asks me a question to tell them, look, this is something that I think. I don't really know it for sure, but I think it because, well, I'm going off on a tangent, but that gives you maybe a kind of a way to think about my influences.
That's very, very interesting. Thank you. This is a selfish question that comes to mind is when you change some of your thoughts, and how does that impact certain relationships in your life? And how do you navigate that? Because I'll add a little more context to that example that you shared, your client who kind of comes in and wants to change, but is still in the same situation, and you want to help them and you care. And, the closer somebody is to us, sometimes the more we want to help, and you have to be a little hands off and let them live their journey. How do you navigate those relationships? And I hope that was kind of clear enough for
Yeah, I
that.
think so. Let me, I'll maybe tell the story of Ron. Ron, if you're listening, apologies. I always use your name in a story. You know who you are. I think when I started this journey, I started to kind of see how relationships were like, kind of like a co-creative kind of thing. People either creating reality, or maybe you could say people are always looking to sell what they believe to be real. It sounds kind of weird the way I said it, because it almost sounds like they can't be. They're not really selling it. Well, they are. Everybody is trying to sell what they believe is real. Sorry, I remember that I used to meet Ron on the weekends, and we'd have a drink, and the conversation would inevitably turn to him telling me all the things that he didn't like about his significant other, and that she doesn't let him do this and doesn't let him do that, doesn't let him do this. And once I started to get into this work at, kind of one of these things, one of these, hard to have these Friday night meetings anymore, because it became so evident that what he was doing was blaming her for the way he felt. And so, I made the decision that I'd ask him that. I'm sure now in retrospect, well, it was good, but I kind of make light of it, because he wasn't particularly thrilled that I had asked that. And essentially what I did is I kind of withdrew my energy from that, and stuff. I couldn't spend time anymore hearing him blame his life on his significant other, when he was, kind of the co-creator in that, and stuff. So when we start to change, the people who look to find us in a certain place aren't going to find us there anymore. And take, for example, something as kind of as basic as blame. Well, we all do it. There are big old, building size blame issues, and it's really subtle ones, but they're all things where we're pointing to someone or something on the outside and saying, I feel a certain way, or my life is a certain way because of that thing on the outside. It's very common. I'm a lawyer. I could tell you I've checked all the books and the codes and treaties and the statutes. I find nothing illegal or against any law about blaming. So it's okay, everybody. You can keep doing it. But it's, it does create problems in our lives, because it becomes a roadblock to looking to what's going on within. So one of the things that, when you start to change the way you look at things, the people who are you with aren't going to find you in those same places anymore. But then, there's Dr. Seuss, who said something like, say what you mean what you say. Those that mind don't matter, and those that don't matter won't mind. That seemed pretty sensible to me when I thought about it.
I can definitely, I'm thinking of a million scenarios as you share that. I think the hardest part for dealing with that is when it comes to family, for example, because you have years of blames, victimhood, and layers of that. And that's the one example that kind of comes to my mind navigating this.
Can I offer a kind of a tip that I think will save people potentially years? This is an important one, because at least maybe for me, because I maybe tend to have to learn through the school of hard knocks, but maybe some people will hear this. Let's see. Here's what sometimes happens. You make a change and you start to see what you did. And then maybe because you start to change, you start to become more in tune to how other people behave, and that how even their behavior or their thoughts are impediments or blockages or downright just chaos in terms of what they do. And what you do is you want to tell them all about it. Don't. I mean, not like that. It's take my word for it. Been there, done that, and tried that. It's more important to be understanding that everybody has the right to think exactly or believe exactly what they want to believe. So what? You're probably still on a journey to Me Too. It's not perfect. Definitely not. They're okay.
Yeah.
Have some passion for them. Okay. And with that framework, it does become a little easier. But when you get right down to it, there aren't going to be a lot of people out there that hear what you want to say. Some will, but when you're standing on the lecture circuit or your own self-imposed pedestal, it's not going to be met with that much enthusiasm. That one took me a few years to learn.
Yeah. We're all on our different growth journey or frequency. I don't know if you've studied frequency or can speak to that at all? I'm just getting into reading a little bit about that, but I feel like that is aligned with our growth. And this inner work and inner exploration.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot in terms of frequencies too.
Can we define that for the audience?
So let's see what we can say about that. If everything that we perceive is just energy, well, energy travels in frequencies. It does. It's kind of the wave-like nature of the universe. This is a very quantum kind of concept. And to take that and to think about it even in terms of thought, I found it handy to think about that example I gave before. Was, oh my God, I got so much today, so much that day, I got so much, and it's kind of a frequency that is defined with kind of, short wavelengths, in other words. But as you start to kind of slow down, the frequency kind of shifts and more things become observable at that new frequency that you resonate at. Maybe you could even say, and this one is more in the kind of maybe something I think, I don't want anybody to go so far as, I'm just going to propose it as something that I think, is that maybe more things come to you because you are resonating at a different frequency. It kind of like what they say, what's that? You get in what you put out, or you attract what you put out. And that's, you can really think about that in kind of a frequency. And the way that I think about floating is almost an experience to have the baseline frequency with which you look at the world be at a slower pace, which you can say in terms, if you like, kind of the way sometimes they divide frequency, let's call it kind of a delta pace. It's slow like this, but when people who meditate understand this, and sometimes I can see people walk in for their first float and I know they have meditation practice because they're already slowed down. If you talk to them about it, if they could say it, they'd probably say they'd never want to go back to the chaotic, fast-paced thought because, the slower is more natural to who we really are. Babies don't do frenzy and stress. This is something we learn when we start to, maybe you could say, clog our mind or introduce thoughts in our operating system that don't align with anything that's real. Okay, let me explain that because I know it's a lot. That you're not good enough is a thought that doesn't align with something real. That you're not worthy doesn't align, that the world's done into you. So a lot of those thoughts clog us up. But once we start to deal with it, we have a natural kind of return, resetting of our nervous system almost to its natural state. That's another way to think about floating. We're kind of getting on a slower vibe, and some people think slower. Why do I want a businessman and a business person, and why do I want to be slower? I would suggest you do. They say, well, but then I won't get as much done. Oh no, you'll get a lot more done. It's the slower part of the mind is the part that allows you to walk up a flight of steps with a cup of coffee in one hand and a cell phone in the other. That's not a conscious thought. Most everything we do is driven by thoughts below the level of conscious. Now we circle back to something we introduced at the beginning of this. So just take this as a kind of a, if maybe true, maybe it'd be a good thing, even more productive in terms of feeling more relaxed, having better relationships, and creating a reality more to your liking if you started to slow down.
Exactly. Well said, well summarized. Thank you so much. And I think that's actually a perfect place for us to pause. Speaking of pausing, I think that would be a great place to wrap up. And I wanted just to thank you so much for taking the time. You are a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate your passion and all of the powerful information that you shared with us. And I encourage anybody who's listening to embark or continue on the path of inner exploration. And before we go, I just wanted to ask you, if you were to leave the audience with just one more bit of advice or something you feel called to share, what would that be?
Maybe I'd direct this to, some people are like, well, that's not me. I'm not an inner explorer. So we'll dismiss the inner explorers now, and I'll just have a quick thing to say to everybody else. Just try. It doesn't, I'm not saying you have to float. There's a lot of things. But if you want to think about floating, that would probably be one good way to do it. All the other stuff about inner exploration, if you embark on a relaxation process, you're going to feel better. And that's it. Your body's going to feel better. You don't need to know anything more than that. You really don't. For those that want to go to other levels, fine. But floating, as we have a crowd here of several thousand that come in. For some people, it's just, they just walk out feeling a little bit better, and that's good enough. So no need to get caught up in all the wavelengths and inner work. That's all stuff that you could access, but you still feel better if you float or do some other kind of work to kind of slow down.
Thank you for saying that, because that beautifully aligns with our mission at Healthy Little Moments, which is it doesn't have to be a huge undertaking. It can just be that one moment, that one day you take for yourself. And so I appreciate you sharing that. And thank you for sharing your journey and your wisdom. And for our listeners, thank you for joining today. We really appreciate you, and we ask you to take care of yourselves and embrace these little moments of wellness. And feel free to subscribe. We're launching a new podcast every single week, so we're happy that you're here, and we hope everybody has a good day.